Okay, good afternoon. Thank you so much for being here in our cozy little historical fiction corner of the world. My name is Cecelia Mecca, and I will be moderating a panel today, and the panelists will be introducing themselves in just a second. But first of all, thanks so much for being here. Hope you guys are having a wonderful conference. This is my, I think, fourth 20Books, I believe, and it's a great event. So how many of you are very first time to this? Okay. And one of our panelists, and veterans have been here before.
Every
good.
one of them.
Well, it's really good to see you guys. And so we're going to be talking about writing historical fiction and marketing historical fiction, and there'll be an opportunity for questions at the end. And so we're going to go ahead and get started. So we'll begin with introductions. Like as I said, my name is Cecelia Mecca. I was an English teacher for 20 years. And published my first historical romance in 2017. It's a medieval, so I write Scottish medieval mostly and romance. And after 2 books, I was matching my income for my education career. So I thought, well, this is a lot more fun than teaching 8th graders to enjoy Romeo and Juliet, which they didn't. So it wasn't really it was a hard decision, actually. I had a pension and I had, a lot at stake. Just had finished a PhD and was like, this is not at all the way I thought my life was going to go. The romance writing career was supposed to be just a hobby, but because of indie publishing, it wasn't. And so, like I said, after 2.5 books and Mark Dawson's course and learning how to market my books, I was matching my income and decided to kind of take the leap and went full-time. So I've been a full-time romance author since. I still write medieval romance. However, 2 years ago I branched out into I put my big girl panties and went into contemporary romance, which is still really scary and difficult. And I love both genres for different reasons. The medieval is my passion. It's what I've always read. It's what I absolutely love. I was a medieval studies minor. I love it, but there's a ceiling there, and we're going to talk about that. Finding readers and the benefits of historical fiction, historical romance, and sometimes the drawbacks where it is really niched. I think it could be kind of a double-edged sword. So we will talk about that a little bit too. So I write under 2 pen names, and that's me. So let's hear a little bit about you guys. We'll start with Sadie.
Hi everyone, my name is Sadie Bosque. I write steamy historical romance, mostly in Georgian and Regency eras, and I've been publishing since 2020, and I've been full-time for most of that time, I think 2.5 years.
Nice.
My name is Heather B. Moore. There's another Heather Moore published author out there. I started publishing in 2004. Traditionally, I wrote mostly historical novels set in ancient Mesoamerica or ancient Arabia, so pretty old stuff. And then I ended up writing some historical thrillers, so I switched publishers, and then now I'm with a different publisher where I also write historical. But with indie publishing, I started in 2012, and I've been able to be a full-time writer for the last 11 years because of indie publishing, so I've been loving that.
Hi, I'm Clifton Slater. I write Roman legions from the First and Second Punic War. And somebody asked me what Punic War was. That was the wars between Rome and ancient Carthage. I started in science fiction, actually wrote 8 science fiction books and 2 epic fantasy books. Didn't really sell, didn't really go anywhere, and I realized that I love research and I loved adventure and I love war. And so I started writing historical fiction, and my income went from to way up. And I'm now a full-time writer, and I love it. I'm working on my 27th novel in that period.
Very good. Well, I think we're going to actually start there because we had talked beforehand about what genres we write and switching genres and mixing things up. So you switched basically
From
to
science
get noticed.
fiction
From
to
science fiction to get
historical
noticed.
fiction.
So if I can have you guys talk a little bit about why this particular genre, what do you say are the benefits for it, or is it just something you love to write, or you did it for a little bit of the marketing too?
Well, a little bit of marketing, but also when I wrote science fiction, I would research what kind of gases came out of a pistol that were fired on a spaceship, so that when somebody tested the air, they would see the nitrites and the other things. And science fiction readers don't care about that stuff. Because everything is science. Science fiction is in the title. But historical fiction readers love those details. And when was the first gladiator games in ancient Rome? We think of Rome, we think of gladiator games. It was 264 BC, it was only 2 years, 262 BC, it was only 2 years into this first Punic War. So that was the first public games, and they had it in the stockyard. So I was able to build a scene with my hero against the villain. They were both teaching gladiators how to fight, and then there was politics in the audience, and it turned into a third of a book for me. But it was the first. So at the end of my books, there's a listing of history, because I want to show people, listen, you enjoyed that. Guess what? I didn't make it up. That was actual history. So your reader's connection, historical fiction, to what happens is so important. Now, you put notes in the back of your books too, right?
Yeah, I do. I actually, some of my books, I'll have like maps, I'll have bibliography, I'll have discussion questions, I'll have author notes, I'll have chapter notes. Like, and honestly, like when the booksellers tell me, I try, go through Ingham or whatever, they say, if I just say, hey, look at all this extra stuff in the book, it's almost an easy sell, because historical readers, just like what Jim was saying, is they love the history part of it. They want to know those details. They want to know what the person is eating and how they farm, and they want to know every detail that you can give them. Of course, not just an analog of it in journal, but
it has to be blended into the story.
Yes.
And the better you are at blending, and I think that's what makes a successful story of fiction, is you're not just saying, oh, there was the god Comulus. Comulus is one of my favorite gods of ancient Rome. It's the god of stupid. So my character is a really bad, he's a sword fighter. And anytime he gets locked in a room with a couple people who are going to beat him up, he goes, have you been worshiping at the altar of Cumulus? And they go, well, we're not stupid. I go, yes, you are.
Can we use that now in modern days?
So this wasn't exactly a question, but since we are talking about the notes, I thought I would add that historical romance readers as well, they're like very picky about the history, and they would
Especially
like...
Regency. You write Regency.
Yes, and they would
I
be-
wouldn't touch Regency with a 10-foot pole.
They are
Nope.
very extremely picky, and if they think that something is wrong, they will let you know. And it doesn't matter if you researched a lot and they would like, no, this isn't how it is. But what I've noticed is if you put notes in my books, they would leave reviews like, oh, this is a very well-researched book. And I would do the same amount of research on another book, and I won't put notes because I forgot or something, or I didn't think it was fun enough to put into the notes, and I wouldn't get the same comments. So this is the tip number one for you. If you don't want to get those comments about like badly researched book, put notes, because they are actually really fun as well for readers. They love maps, they love notes. So even if you think it's not that fun because like something else was more fun in another book, still put notes in it, because actually historical romance and historical fiction readers, they love to get those bits of information that you actually research for your book.
Yeah. I think that's actually a really good tip. It's something, so right now I just started a new series called The Night School Chronicles, and it's a kind of academy meets medieval knights. And I already put in my Facebook group just the other day, this is the new series, this is what we're doing. Somebody jumped, the first comment was, because I kind of outlined it, we're looking at you're covering the anarchy? I'm so excited about this period. And the first thing I wrote down, and the first thing I thought was, I am. And that's, a 20-year period where I took the timeline and all over the place because of my story. Absolutely, the first note I made was, this has to go in the beginning. Like, this is Lucy based, and I'll talk about that just to kind of head off those comments. Because it is romance, but also those readers can get really picky. That's a really good tip. I already wrote it down for myself. And sometimes I do that at the beginning, sometimes at the end. But this one, I was like, oh, my readers know this period. They're excited about this period. That means they're going to be on it. And so I need to kind of head that off. So yeah, really good tip. So we're talking about, fiction. I'm kind of curious with the audience. How many of you are historical fiction? Historical romance? Something else? I'm curious what that is. Historical fantasy. Oh my gosh, I would love that. Fantasy's like my number one. That's really cool. Historical time travel. Oh, I love time. I did 2 time travel series. They're my favorite. That is really, really cool. Okay, so, there's a lot of overlap. Obviously, we talked about historical fiction versus romance, and honestly, the thing that it has in common is the research. So I want to talk about that real quick. You had mentioned that was one of your
I want to
favorites.
tell my romance story.
You could tell your romance story, and then we'll talk about research. It'll be great.
It's not romancing the blade. Okay, this, my main character, I researched weddings. I had a side story of my main character meeting the beautiful Gabriella DeMarco. And Ilario finally proposed to Gabriella. They're going to get married. And Gabriella is standing there holding the wedding rope. You know, you tie the wedding knot. And she's holding the knot, but she's not doing anything. So the maidens, the young girls in the audience, the thing goes, tie the knot, tie the knot. And the older women are going, don't tie the knot, don't tie the knot. So Ilario's stepmother cuts up to him and goes, hey, this rich senator over there has a daughter that's marriable. Why don't you marry her? And Ilario goes, Mom, she's not that good looking. He said, that's fine, because when you go to war, she won't cheat on you. So there you go. There's my romance. Oh, and she tied the knot. So,
All right, so thank you for that. Research. So if maybe one of the ladies can tell me a little bit about research methods or tips that you can give that you found in terms of researching your historical fiction or your historical romance, something that works for you.
So this is just word of advice, is you do not have to be the historian to write historical novel. You are the storyteller. And so you could literally spend an entire year, 2 years, 3 years researching for a book, but if you are like, well, I don't want to spend that much time because, you know, you're trying to make some money and get things going, I probably spend from first day I start researching to having a historical novel completely ready to, you know, go to press is maybe 5 to 6 months. And so obviously I'm going to be on a shortened timeline. So for instance, I have a book that just came out. It's set in Indonesia during World War II. And I was able to interview an internment camp survivor, and her family spent the time in these camps during the war. And so, but she was 5 years old. And how am I supposed to tell this whole developed story? So I went on Amazon, I got all these self-published memoirs, but still, I was like, I'm just gonna read the ones that are pertinent. I'm gonna take some notes. I gave myself, I think, 3 weeks just to immerse myself. I took notes, I annotated, and then I said, okay, you have enough where you can start writing. And then now you can go back, and as you're writing, you might have a hole you have to go fill, so you have to do more research. But I set myself, you know, because to me, writing is my business, and it's how I support my family. So I had 2,000 words a day. I wrote 5 days a week. I always take 2 days off. And that way it just, some days I could get that done in 2 hours. Sometimes it took me 8 or 9 hours, depending on if the research slowed me down. So I just encourage that you don't have to spend 10 years. You don't have to be the expert. Use what expertise is out there, and then just cherry pick and put it into your story.
Anyone else?
I don't really have any.
Oh, that's okay.
I don't have any.
I will
ahead.
say this about research. One of the reasons I limit my books to a year, maybe a year and a half for each book, because the research is reading PDFs of badly copied English translations from Latin, and your eyes will just go blind. So I find that if I know what happened before from the last book, and I know what, I kind of research ahead a little bit to see where things are going to go, but I limit my books to about a year. So that helps me limit my research so I don't have to research everything.
And I'll piggyback on Heather because I started researching for my first book when I was in college. I just turned 50. So it was a long time ago. And I published in 2017. And so that was the hang up. I was like, I know it's been 20 years, but I don't think I know everything about 12th century Northumbria. I need a little bit more. I swear, I was so nervous. And it's historical romance. I'm not knocking romance. I love it. It's my career. But, you know, this wasn't, it was historical romance, but I was so nervous somebody would take one of those, you know, tidbits and I would have gotten it wrong. And I probably could have spent about like 19 years less of research. So as soon as she said that, I was like, yeah, that was me. So, yeah, they're gracious too. I mean, as long as you do your best and do your research.
No, they're not.
I
write mid-Republic Roman Legion.
Yeah.
They were not
They're
a
vicious?
full-time legion. They were
Yeah.
part-time. They went back to their farms, the harvest. They went back to the farms to plant. Well, a lot of readers for ancient Rome read Imperial Legion. They expect the full-time Legion, they expect order, they expect everything to be right. And when I first started writing this stuff, I was getting like 1-star, 2-star reviews going, you don't know what you're talking about. That's not how the Legion works. And so you've got to be careful when you pick your thing. Now, if you pick an area that you get hammered on a little bit, you stick with it, and what happens is you eventually have your readers will find you, and you will train them. My favorite email from a reader ever said, I like your stories. My wife and I read your notes, historical notes together, and we just get a new dog, and we named the dog Libby. If you don't know, Libby is an ancient historian. So I win.
I love that. So we are going to talk about marketing books too, but I do want to stay a little bit with, the writing the books as well, because I think, it's obviously the craft is the battle, I think. And for me, it's about characters. And so I really wanted to ask this question about how do you bring historical characters to life? Characters and or settings, because the historical part, sometimes you can get bogged down a little bit. And I have found the reason I asked this question is when I'm writing contemporary, that comes very easy, and it doesn't necessarily with the historical. It's something you kind of have to pull out a little bit more because you're sometimes bogged down in the history. So do you have any tips on bringing the characters and the settings to life and not necessarily, inundating them with the historical facts? Anybody who wants to grab it?
My first series followed a young swordsman through the First Punic War, and it was a 19-book series, and it was great. And I hit 19 books, and I said, "Do I write 20?" And I said, "No, because I'm at the top of my game. I can pull all of those readers into my next series." My next series, I tried something different. I have a made-up character, and I have Cornelius Scipio, who was in the very first battle of the First Punic War and was the general that defeated Hannibal. So a lot of history there for him, but I'm writing about a real character. And the things that happen to him, I have to find his motivations, I have to find his enemies, and I have to bring them to life. And but the second character is an artificial character, it's a fictional character. He's a Cretan archer. Cretan archers are fascinating because most people have never heard of them. Well, Sparta was founded by the Minoans, and Crete was founded by the Minoans, and where the Spartan children went into the academy at 8 years old to learn to be soldiers. In Crete, they taught them to be archers. So if you start looking through history, Alexander the Great had Cretan archers in his army. They were world-renowned mercenaries. But few people know about it, and that's the one thing I bet you guys. But if I can find something in history people don't know about, awesome. So but it's combining the two characters. So when you're writing a real character, you're going to have limitations because they are going to have to do stuff you can't. For me, they have to do what they did. If he's going back to Rome this year, he's got to go back to Rome no matter what I want him to do in Iberia.
I think for me, a man falling in love 2,000 years ago, he has the same emotions as one falling in love today, a woman losing her child. Like, the emotions are the same. It doesn't matter what era you're in. One thing, though, that I do try to bring in is the five senses into the scenes. And also, as far as, like Jim mentioned, is the character motivations. The last thing I try to do when I'm creating, like, a historical character is I have to kind of take off your modern sensibilities. A woman in ancient Israel, she's not going to be upset that she doesn't own property because that's her culture. I'm upset she doesn't own property. And I might say that to a book club I'm speaking to, and so sometimes you have to kind of look at what their viewpoint is, even if it's not quite what your viewpoint or your belief is.
Yeah, I wanted to piggyback on what you're saying because especially in Regency, for some reason, readers have this idea that women were very I don't know, like in Victorian or Regency or Victorian era, that the women were very like proper and like they weren't outspoken or they weren't stubborn, but people always had those emotions. People were always different. And when you're writing those characters, you just need to put sort of that stubborn and that outspoken person into that era and see how other people would react to her. So you're not like, she is not going to change just because she was born at that time period, but how people react to her and how she acts based on that is going to change. So you're basically just putting the same people around you, but in a different setting, and you're imagining how they would react to those situations and how they would behave based on how people interact with them and how they react to their character.
Thank you. So we have these wonderful stories where we're weaving the history and the character together, and we're doing all of the research. If you want to make a full-time career at this, which is, I'm assuming, why most of us are here, how do we do that? So let's talk
Good
about.
question.
Good question. Let's talk about that. We are a combination of indie and hybrid. So talk to me about that particular choice, and we'll kind of start from there, and then kind of move into the marketing of these books, and how can we sell these historical fiction and historical romance books?
Yeah, I am indie all the way, and I've been indie from the very beginning. And the reasoning for that was because first reason was I didn't want to wait 2 years to see my book published. I just wanted to write it and to publish it. Second reason was I didn't want someone else to tell me what my heroine could or could not do. I didn't want someone to tell me how the cover is going to look like. So I'm basically a very controlling person. And I didn't want someone else telling me that something is not to their liking. And also, I worked in a nonprofit before I became an author, and I worked with neurodivergent people. Sorry for my English, and I wanted to tell those stories because we usually those people didn't exist in history, but they did, and I didn't want to be bogged down in those details. I didn't know if publisher is going to publish that. I don't know if that was going to be an issue. Right now, we see the boom in that area. But back when I was writing in 2020, I didn't know if that was something people would be interested in. So I just kind of wanted to do my own thing, and I wanted to be independent. And actually, when I released my first book, I had a few people on Instagram messaging me like, "Oh, I hope you get picked up by a publisher." And I'm like, I don't want that. Thank you, but no thank you. And so basically that's why I picked indie route.
Anybody else?
Well, for me, since I've been doing this for 20 years, indie route was very expensive and not really practical because you had to buy giant print runs and that kind of thing. And I remember, so I started out traditional publishing. It was still a journey. I started out with a smaller publisher. And then I had a friend she was 60 years old. She was in my critique group, and she had 10 beautifully written middle grade novels that she kept hitting the ceiling with. She'd get to the committee, she'd get, an agent interest, and she just kept hitting the ceiling. And she told me, "Heather, I'm not going to live forever, and I have these 10 books. I'm going to start putting out these books." And so she just took the plunge, and I just watched her, and she kept encouraging me. And I was so tempted because I was actually with a second publisher at the time, but I was writing more and writing different too. I wrote a story about my ancestor that was accused of witchcraft in the Salem witch trials, and my publisher publishing my biblical fiction, they weren't going to do that. So I decided to self-publish it. And so I felt like it gave me, just like you said, I have creativity. No one tells me no. Obviously, you have, it's a little more risky because, you're like, oh, wait, is this really good? And you just have to have a little bit of confidence, which is great when you have a tribe that supports you.
Let me say this. If you published 1 book, 2 books, 3 books, you've been through the worst part of it, okay? But I've talked to a number of people today and yesterday at the convention that are sitting on a book. They're going back, they're going to go, well, I have to do one more round of edits. I have to go do something else with it. I'll tell you right now, you put it up on Kindle, you put it out there, you take the slings and arrows if you get it, and you take the money. And you can always go edit it. You can always go fix it. Maybe somebody will send you an email and go, hey, this is not exactly right. You go research that, and then you can always fix it. There's nothing stops you from going in. You don't have a whole editing chain of people, if you're an indie, that tell you you can't, because you can. And the world is waiting for your unique take on your piece of history. And please don't sit on it any longer. This week, next week, put it out there. Find out, because you're going to find out like me, you're going to find out like, oh my God, people really like this. I get emails from people all around the world. I got a guy in Spain that goes, oh man, I love it when Cornelius got to Iberia. And I'm like, okay. And what I did, the next book had more Iberia in it because doggone it, he liked it and I like him. So yeah, so don't sit on your books. Too many people are sitting on really good books and finding out who you are.
I wish I had you about 20 years ago to tell me that. That would have been fantastic. Super quick, because I want to ask you each your most successful marketing approach before we get to questions. For me, I only knew the traditional route. Back when I published, I just assumed, because I Googled how do I publish a book, and it said to get an agent. So I made a list of agents, went to an RWA in San Diego in 2016, and it was a very fortuitous, like I was in line, knew nobody, and it was in line for to get a pizza, and this girl said, would you like to, sit and have a pizza with me? She writes Scottish historical romance, made a very good living doing it, and we sat down. I explained to her I was there to pitch an agent. I was really excited because Avon is like the romance publishing house. That's who I wanted to be with. That was what I was there to do. I'm going to get published by Avon. Doesn't work like that. But I didn't know, and we sat down, and she said, so I'm just curious why you're not considering indie publishing. Medieval romance isn't really big right now in traditional publishing. So I don't know what you're talking about. She said, well, you need to go to a session tomorrow called, I don't know if anyone's been around and has heard of the data guy. Do you guys remember the data guy? He scraped all the Amazon data back in the day. She said, there's this guy who does all the data, and he'll talk about self-publishing, indie publishing versus trad. I went to that. I saw the money that was being made. I called my husband and I was like, so I'm going to be an indie author. It's really, he's like, what? I said, I don't know. I just found out this morning about it. So again, I did pitch, and that agent did say to me, it was a 15-minute meeting, and she said, I'm sorry to say medieval romance just isn't the thing right now. It died in the 90s. I was like, well, guess what? I know about the data guy, and I know this girl, Emma Prince, who's writing it. And I switched that day, and I never actually pitched any other agent except that one. And that was it. And so it worked out well for me. So marketing. For me, I'll start with this, and I would like to hear from everyone, so then we could do questions. Your most successful marketing approach. For me, I found, I forget his name, but led me to Mark Dawson. So when I first started kind of jumping into indie publishing, I was already at a conference, so I went to all of the sessions about indie publishing, and one of them was about email marketing. And so I started an email newsletter when I went home, and I was about a year out of actually publishing the book, because I had only had like 4 chapters when I went to this conference, so it wasn't written or anything like that. But I started the newsletter anyway, and I was really big on Twitter at the time, I loved Twitter, so I went on and I tweeted all of my favorite historical romance authors, and I asked them for their favorite historical books, and I put lists together, and I put this like medieval romance magazine together, where you can hear from your favorite authors about their favorite books and just all of these things that I don't know what I was doing. For about 6 months, I was thinking, if I were to get a newsletter from someone who doesn't have a book, what else can I put out? Started the newsletter, so by the time I got the book published, I did have a newsletter list of people interested in, I did giveaways, things like that for historical romance books. So for me, it was really the email marketing. And I had no ads. I left my job without ads. I couldn't do that today. But back in the day, it was mostly, just Facebook. And I started a group right away when groups were like very brand new, and kind of really cultivating those existing readers. It's a lot easier to cultivate the readers you have and make them connect with you and love you than it is to find a reader. So that's been kind of my strategy from day one, is really like, once someone attaches to me, you're my best friend. We're going to dinner. I literally have gone to people's like houses, and I'm not even kidding. Like, that is my thing, plus email marketing. That was for me the most successful thing. It still is.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to add to the previous, to why indie author, is because you take most of the money yourself.
And that's really good. Yeah.
You don't share with the publisher. And that's why marketing is actually more lucrative with indie authors as well. My approach to marketing is mostly Amazon ads. I'm actually a very sort of low energy person. I don't have an energy to be on social media all the time. I don't do TikToks. It's very difficult for me. I can be on social media for like a week and then I'm tired. So if you're like me, do Amazon ads because they're really easy. You just set them up and then you forget about them. And it's really good for like, I do newsletters and I have a Facebook group with my friends who are here, some of them. And so this is really good for cultivating already existing readers.
Yeah.
But if you're looking for new readers, I think Amazon ads is something that's really helpful, and they're easier than Facebook and they're easier than TikTok because you don't have to be there every day. You just set them up, and then if they're successful, you continue doing them. If they're not successful, you just kill them and start something new.
Yeah, I do that now. I don't want to say like I don't do ads anymore. I mean, I can't get away with that now. So Amazon ads or Facebook ads for me in historical don't work. They do in contemporary, not in historical romance. So I do almost all Amazon ads. The ads that do best, and if you're an existing author and you have them, what's working really well for me right now is box set ads, to the point where the ACOS is doing so well, I'm like, I need more box sets. So I'm gonna make sure I only have about half of my other backlist boxed. I'm gonna box set more because those Amazon ads are just gangbusters, but yeah, mostly Amazon ads as well.
Yeah, I mean, I do that. I do email lists and Amazon ads and stuff. Kind of what I've done that's a little bit unique that I don't hear a lot of people doing, as well as I hit the book club market a lot because my books kind of lend to book club fiction. And so this is actually in 2020 when it was really hard to get out and interact and do conferences, is I started just posting on my newsletter and on my social media, hey, are you in a book club? I'm doing like a book club contest. I'm giving away books to a certain number of book clubs. Anyway, so ever since then, so like the last 3 years, I've been asked repeatedly back to these book clubs, and in my newsletters, I'm always saying, hey, I can come speak. So everything's mostly on Zoom, and so it's just been kind of a little niche that I never really thought was there until I started exploring it.
That's awesome.
My readers' tendency to be, and amazing enough, I have a lot of female readers that enjoy adventure books. My big newsletters haven't worked for me. I have not been able to do big newsletters because my people do not want to give out their email addresses. I do Amazon ads, but I do Facebook ads. I do Boost on Facebook. I'm not a social person as far as, like, oh, I went to dinner and this is what I had, or we went rock climbing or bicycle. I can't do that. So what I needed to do was soften, because every one of my posts is about my books. So I need to soften it. So I put my dog in it, Delilah the rescue
They love
dog.
dogs.
Also, I'll put a picture, I'll take a picture, I get a free picture, and I'll put the book, and I'll put a picture of Delilah in the picture. And then my posts break all the rules of Facebook. My posts are like 300, 400 words long. I'll have a little conversation with Delilah. Delilah, you want to tell people about the new book? Are there treats involved? Yeah, afterwards, tell the people about it. Then we'll go into an excerpt from the book. And at the bottom, she'll go, treats now? And I'll go, yes, dear, we'll get to you in a minute. Let me finish telling people where they can get the book. So, and people look at my ads and they go, I would never read that. It's too long. I go, yes, you're right, because you're not my reader. But if you read what I write and you go, hey, that was fun, you're going to love my books. And that's where most of my readers come from Facebook like that. So break the rules if you have to.
I like it. All right, questions. So we have a microphone in the middle just because it's recorded. So if anyone has any questions, we would love to take those.
I didn't sit there on purpose to hog the microphone.
Yes, you did.
Yes, I did. Hi, my name's Christopher.
Hi.
This is, I think I found my people.
Yay.
Yay, I've been looking all over. So I have a couple of ads if I could. One is, I'm the historical fantasy guy. So I'm kind of straddling two genres. I've been pushing in fantasy, but what I find is I get pushback that, hey, there's no dragons. Hey, there's no elves. Okay, but there's magic consistent with the time period. Should I kind of pull back into historical for my interactions and promotions and say you're just going to have to tolerate the magic, or should I continue to push the fantasy? Oh, I'm period is early medieval, 13th century.
There's enough history out there that I've had elves in my book, but it was mistaken for somebody else. They're really rowers with big necks, and they had their tongues cut out. So so that people thought they were elves or thought they were trolls or whatever. The difference between historical fantasy and historical fiction, adventure fiction, if you will, is really the magic. And what I do, my guys are always mentioning gods. God Stuculus is one of my favorite, right? Is the god of manure. So, you know, there's always somebody's walking through, you know, worshiping, and it means the place is a mess. So there's so many mythologies out there that can be blended into a historical fiction book that the fantasy part, unless you're going to go big, dragons, the whole thing, the orc army, right? You're walking that fine line, and you're not defining yourself for your readers. That's.
Yeah, I hear you, and I think that's maybe part of the problem. I've got one more quick question,
Yeah,
if
go
I
ahead.
can, and it deals with the historical element. I know in fantasy there's a lot of in-story words. You read not so much Martin, but gosh, you know, you read Sanderson, and you read the other fantasy writers. There's a lot of in-story words. In historical, you have language-specific words. They're real words, but they're in a Slavic language, or they're in an Asian language. I've put them in for a little bit of, as a word whisker to identify the speaker, or a little bit of just local color. But I've had some pushback on in-story words, even if they're defined by context and reused so the reader knows it. In historical, any problem?
My characters curse in Latin.
Oh, I love curses in Latin and Sicilian, yes.
But you can get
Sicilian.
really wound up in different languages. I've got Greek, I've got Carthaginian, which is Phoenician, I've got Latin, I've got Iberian, you got Egyptian, you got Anatolian. The problem is when you're writing a story, you want it to be clear for your readers. It's less important, the historical proper words, than it is just English that stuff up. And your readers, because you want your readers to glide through that book and go, wow, that was fun.
Yeah, you just need to just maybe lighten it up a little bit. Like, I've written books that are set in East Berlin and Indonesia, and so they have Japanese and Javanese and Dutch in there. And so you need to just pick and choose so it's not so heavy.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Hi.
Hi, my name is Sam. I've got a long career of publishing nonfiction. I'm a university professor,
Nice.
and this is my first time to take the foray into fiction. And my question is, I want to write historical fiction set in the 1950s and 60s, so near history. What I want to know is it okay for me to inject a character with a real person? Just as an example, if I have a character who's a bad guy and I want him to talk to J. Edgar Hoover, and that never really happened in real life, is that okay to do? I mean, do the readers accept that?
If it leads to an event, if it has a purpose.
Sure.
As you know, if they talk and then later somebody does a double cross and the reader goes, oh my God, it's a double cross and I saw it, I should have seen it coming when they had their dialogue. That's the purpose. Everything has to have one thing about historical fiction, I'm not sure about romance, okay? But everything in that book has to have a purpose. Whereas this leads to this, leads to this. There's no room for, we'll just go off on a flight of fantasy when we're thinking. Because it's historical fiction, you're anchored in history. But then the characters' interaction are important. I have a fictional character as an archer, and I have a real general, Cornelius Scipio. And their interactions always have to lead to something that happened in history.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
I'm sorry, was I talking too much?
That was a clear-cut answer. Everybody was like, yes, you can do that. There you go. Hi.
Hi. How do you find the right readers if you write historical romance but not in one of the more popular time periods? Because I write in like late Victorian Gilded Age, and I seem to have a problem with a lot of readers. First of all, they're disappointed that it's not a Regency, even though it says on the cover that it's not. And then I'm also having problems finding like other authors to like do group promos and things like that with. Just because there doesn't seem aside from Joanna Shoup, I've got no targeting for my ads and things like that. So if you're in a smaller niche, how do you branch out, I guess?
Well, I write Georgian romance and Regency. So Georgian is also smaller, and there is a smaller subset of readers who enjoy that. But I think because I write also Regency, they cross over. But what I do with my Georgian series is I still advertise it to Regency readers and to Victorian readers, even though it's a lot further away. But yours is closer to Victorian, so I would sort of attach to those authors and to those books and sort of say that, and you can also advertise it like Victorian with a twist, sort of, because it's not Victorian, but it's close enough so that people will recognize the area, era, sorry, but that it's also something new, so they can learn something new. And I think that people usually they are afraid to branch out because they're used to this era, they know Regency, but if they branch out, once they branch out, they usually like it. So that's how, at least that's how my Georgian period series worked. They were like, we didn't know if we were going to like it, but we did. So the same, I would just pick authors who are closer to you in the era and then try to advertise to those readers.
Yeah, and Facebook is going to be tough for you. I mean, I write Scottish medieval romance. It's a niche, and Facebook is just impossible for me.
So, and really quick, is it 20s or 30s?
No, like I write late Victorian,
Okay, yeah.
early 1900s.
So
Like
okay,
that-
because I know
that
Gilded
period.
Age is actually making a pretty big comeback in the
Yeah.
trade market. Like Noelle Salazar just released The Roaring Days of Nora Willie. Anyway, but I've seen like publishers, weekly start telling that so I think it's on its way. So I think you're going to be in a good spot.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. We're going to do one more question, and then would love for you guys, are you guys okay with a few more questions when we're done? Okay, so we're going to do one more question, and then please come up as soon as we're all finished so we can answer your other questions, but get everybody out for their next session. So go ahead.
Okay, so I am a contemporary romance author, but I love history, and I've loved it my entire life. So, but I want to, because historical is kind of niche, and it's hard, to find the audience in the market and all that. So I'm planning an early 2025 release date ending, okay, for a 2-book series based in the South in the 1800s, late 1800s, early 1900s, okay? And so my question is, do you suggest, in order to get the interest going and to build intrigue in advance, maybe starting out with a Substack and sharing my research that I'm doing in order to try to build an interested audience in advance, so that by the time I get to the release date and the ads, and because I feel like ads is something that you're doing, like a month in advance, and then in your Kirkus review or something like that maybe. But if I don't have a single historical to my name yet, and the first book is going to be a historical fiction, the second will be historical romance. So in order to build that in advance, what do you suggest as far, because I didn't really hear specifics of audience building and that, other than ads, especially right now when the ads game is so helpful.
I'm going to take that real quick, only because there's 1 minute left, and then you're welcome to come up and get some more answers. So get everybody out here. I would say absolutely, if a Substack if you're into that culture and know that culture, absolutely start it there. For me, it was a newsletter. For other people, it could be social media if you already have a following somewhere. But there's no reason to not start sharing your research somewhere and building an audience. For me, I would capture newsletter. I would capture emails, because most of the authors I know, email marketing is their #1 marketing. But it doesn't have to be email. It could be a Substack. I'm not familiar as much with Substack, but there's no downside to that. Absolutely, I would start collecting. I wouldn't do ads, obviously, right now, but I would collect people's emails or information somewhere. You can even start a Facebook group. I know one of the most popular urban fantasy authors is a good friend of mine. He started a Facebook group almost 2 years before he published a book. His Facebook group was rabid, still is his #1 marketing kind of arm, and he had 10,000 people in his group before he published. That's an anomaly, but a Facebook group, so it doesn't matter where, start collecting them. So absolutely. Coming up for questions, guys. I hope you enjoyed the session. Thank you so much for being here. We appreciate it.